So when you look at the Hammer horror series of Dracula movies, you just gotta talk about the fact that the second movie, the first sequel to their hit Dracula film starring Christopher Lee as the Count, doesn't have Christopher Lee in it and doesn't even have Dracula. Well, it's a good thing the movie is pretty darn awesome. Let's talk about it. How's it going, my friends? Welcome again to the Cobwebs channel. My name is Daniel, and thank you so much for coming back to this review series that I'm doing on all of the Dracula films made by Hammer back in the day. I absolutely love this series, and this is the first sequel, Brides of Dracula from 1960. Now, when Horror of Dracula, the first film of the series, was a huge hit for Hammer, they rushed right into production on a sequel with the same director, Terence Fisher, the same screenwriter, Jimmy Sangster, the same star, Peter Cushing. But there was one other star of Horror of Dracula that is conspicuously missing from this movie. Yeah, we'll get to that.
Listen to the beat of your heart, Marianne. You hear the beat of fear within you. You have strayed into a world of evil, where frightened people are held in the grip of unearthly horror.
Now, first of all, I gotta comment on these opening credits. This is probably the greatest font that Hammer ever used, the most iconic. I mean, oh my god, that is their best logo they have ever had. And then the font of Brides of Dracula, it looks so good. I really like the music here too. It's a different composer. Malcolm Williamson did the music for it, and the music is really good throughout the film. Definitely not as catchy, iconic, or great as in the first movie, but still pretty darn good. And right after the credits, this movie tells us that this is gonna have amazing atmosphere. I mean, oh my gosh, look at this dark, gloomy, foggy forest. It just looks so good, and there's this voiceover going over it, introducing that Transylvania is a home of magic and devilry. So we're really setting the stage for some good spooky vibes right at the start. We then go to a coach and see it's driven by actor Michael Ripper. Now, Michael Ripper is super iconic with Hammer films. He actually appeared in more Hammer movies than Peter Cushing did or Christopher Lee, so it's cool to see him here. And inside the coach seems to be our main character for this film, Marianne. She is played by Yvonne Munlar, or as the ridiculous trailer for this movie calls her, Hammer's new sex kitten.
Beautiful Yvonne Munlar, France's latest sex kitten.
Yeah, she doesn't have sex in this movie, so it's kind of false advertising. Anyway, Marianne is a French woman who is traveling from Paris to an all-girls school where she can then be a teacher. She stops at this inn tavern, you know, a classic place in a vampire movie for somebody to stop, and her coachman abandons her. She doesn't understand why. What is it that scared him away? And she's like, well, what can I do? Can I stay here at this inn? And they tell her there's no room for her, and they seem to be very scared of something. At that point, a mysterious older woman shows up that she comes up to Marianne and offers that she can stay at her house. She can come up to her castle as she is the Baroness of these lands, and then she'll send her on her way in the morning. I'm sure that'll work out very well. Now, right here, I just gotta stop and say Martita Hunt is fantastic in this movie. She's so dark and creepy and mysterious, very obviously, and Marianne doesn't really get any of that. You know, Marianne, she's very, very beautiful, so it's a pleasure to spend this movie with her, but she is extremely naive, and I don't know if that's really a problem with the screenplay. I think this character is just extremely naive, and she just happily goes off to this dark, mysterious castle with this creepy Baroness, and there the Baroness gives her this really creepy backstory. And again, I keep using the word creepy, about how her son lives there in the house with her, but he is mad, and she keeps him locked away, and she encourages the belief in the village that he is dead, because he's as good as dead anyway, and she hasn't even seen him in years. It's really unsettling, and immediately she should be like, okay, you need to take me back to this inn. I will sleep on the floor in front of the fire. I don't even need a room. But she's like, oh, wow, that's pretty crazy. That's too bad. Okay, well, I'm going to go to bed. That's basically how it goes. You know what? She's more like Keanu Reeves, Jonathan Harker from Bram Stoker's Dracula from the 90s.
Oh, yes.
Than Jonathan Harker is in Horror of Dracula. He's actually kind of awesome, I think. This character is much more Keanu, I think.
Bloody wolves chasing me through some blue inferno.
Now that the Baroness's son has been introduced in the story, of course we got to meet the guy, and not long after going to bed, she does. She thinks she witnesses him about to kill himself. She goes to stop him, to save him. He's definitely a guy that needs saving. All he needs is a good woman. But she meets him, the Baron, played by David Peel. So this is our vampire of the movie, is David Peel. And let's go ahead and pause and talk about the fact that Christopher Lee is not in this movie. So why? Why isn't Christopher Lee in this film? Well, I wish I could just go back in time and ask somebody point blank why, somebody that really knows, because it's really hard to find a concrete, definitive answer on this. There's some places on the internet that say that Christopher Lee just refused to come back, but they don't seem very credible to me. They don't really back it up in any way. I'm not sure that there is a definitive answer that still exists today on why this happened, but the best answer, the most credible one I can find, is that they didn't want to pay what Christopher Lee wanted to be paid. And that seems the most likely to me. I don't believe that Christopher Lee just refused, because he would come back to play Dracula anyway, again, many, many times. He probably just wanted to get paid more than they wanted to pay. And honestly, if you think about it, I can understand them saying no, because for one thing, this movie does have a bigger budget than the first movie does. And you can tell, because the atmosphere of this movie is astounding. This might be the greatest Hammer film for atmosphere that they ever made. It might be. The set design is by Bernard Robinson, who did it for Hammer films quite a bit. And I mean, oh my God, like this castle that the Baron lives in, like the gargoyles, everything in there is amazing. Everything is lit so well. There's lots of colored gel lighting, never on people, so it doesn't really give you like a Suspiria kind of vibe, but just on the backgrounds. It's really, really cool. I just love how this movie looks. So every dollar is on the screen. And if you put your head back in this time period, I think it doesn't seem as obvious that they need to bring back Christopher Lee. I mean, nowadays there's so many horror franchises that it just seems obvious. Like, yeah, you bring back Michael Myers for Halloween. Well, most of the time, right? You bring back Freddy Krueger for Nightmare on Elm Street. That's what you do. But at this time, the first gothic horror sequel that Hammer had made came out the year before. It was The Revenge of Frankenstein, their first Frankenstein sequel. That one also brings back Peter Cushing, but not Christopher Lee's monster. So they already had precedents for doing this. And if you look at the sequel that was made to Todd Browning's Dracula from 1931, that was Dracula's daughter. And that film does not have Dracula in it either. So there's quite a bit of precedence for this decision. I think it's totally possible that they just thought, well, we don't really want to pay what he's asking for, and the character is dead anyway. He died in the first movie, so let's do something else. And I respect it. I respect that they do something else. I think it works out in a lot of ways, doesn't work out in every way, and let's talk about that. So as we meet David Peel as Baron, the Baron Meinster, he's very different than Christopher Lee. He's very handsome and charming in this very youthful, boyish, very posh kind of a way.
You're very beautiful. So you have come to help me, have you?
You can tell that he is trying to seduce Marianne, but not really in like a super sexual way, like Christopher Lee's aggressive sexuality that he had in that movie. But again, in this kind of just boyish, romancing kind of a way. He brings a very different energy than Christopher Lee did. Also, Christopher Lee is very tall. This guy's kind of short. Christopher Lee is dark and handsome, and this guy is blonde and, again, more boyish. It's a completely different take. And I respect it. The Baron gives us a different side of the story than his mother did.
My mother thinks of me as inhuman, doesn't she? I suppose she's told you that I'm mad.
That he is not crazy, and she's just keeping him locked up because everything that the mother owns is really his by inheritance, and she's just trying to keep it away from him. And when Marianne has to decide who to believe, well, I think it really comes down to the fact that one of them is handsome and she's attracted to him, and the other one is a creepy old lady, so she goes with the handsome guy. And you know what? Who can blame her? That lady is definitely creepy, and the Baron seems like a nice guy. He's not a nice guy. So now she frees him. And I really like the nurse's reaction to this. The nurse that's a character we haven't talked about yet. That's Frida Jackson as Greta. She is the woman that lives with the Baroness and basically just takes care of the Baron while he's locked up. And she is going insane that he has been freed. She is cackling with madness, with terror.
He's free, the cunning devil!
And she really sells that, like, the Baron is horrifying. He is scary, and this is a terrible thing that you have let him loose. I also like the backstory that she then reveals about the Baron, that he was basically just a spoiled, bad kid, and his mother did nothing to really discourage his bad behavior and just kind of went along with everything. He got into a bad crowd, and one of them turned him into a vampire. Now, did he make friends with Dracula? Did Dracula do it? Actually, the original title for the screenplay for this was Disciple of Dracula, but there were a lot of changes that were made before it became Brides of Dracula. I don't know. That's never really revealed. But he got turned into a vampire, and then she didn't call a priest, she didn't call a doctor, she just locked him up and started bringing young girls one by one to her house to feed to her son. That's pretty creepy. I think that's a really good backstory for our main vampire here. So I think they really well set him up to be pretty darn scary. But David Peel just can't really back it up. I like David Peel in the dialogue sequences. I think he's good. I think he's good when he's being completely different from Christopher Lee.
Don't worry. She can't harm you now.
But then when he goes full vamp mode, when he's doing a Christopher Lee impression, it doesn't work. He doesn't look as intimidating. He doesn't feel as intimidating. He can't quite sell it. That's another question that I can't find a credible answer to. Why was David Peel cast? Because he had never had this big of a role in anything before and never would again. This is like his 15 minutes of fame, this one movie. Why did they pick him? I don't know. But I do think most of the time he's very good. But when he's going full Christopher Lee, it doesn't really work. As Marianne is running away from the castle, she is found and rescued by Professor Van Helsing. Here we go. Peter Cushing, around a half an hour into this movie, finally shows up. But actually, the structure for this is very similar to Horror of Dracula. We spend about 20-25 minutes or so with Jonathan Harker. He seems like our main character. He then gets killed off. Van Helsing becomes the main character. This is basically the same, except Marianne doesn't get killed off. She stays around with the movie, but very much lead character status moves over to Professor Van Helsing. But I gotta say, I really love the first act of this movie and how it almost feels like it could be its own contained short film, or rather its own contained fairy tale. It feels very fairy tale like, which is what Terrence Fisher kind of considered his gothic horror films more so to be, and that it is about a young girl lost in the woods, goes somewhere she shouldn't, and meets the big bad wolf.
Come here, will you? Don't be frightened. I want to look at you.
Van Helsing takes Marianne back to the inn, and they find out that a girl has already been murdered in the village. So the Baron, he didn't waste any time. He's going out killing people already, and Van Helsing knows there are vampires about. He has this interesting little interaction with the innkeeper, where the innkeeper's saying like, oh, people think it's vampires, but that's just some superstition.
Vampires and such. You must humor these local superstitions.
Which is weird because the innkeeper and his wife were terrified when the Baroness came in and took Marianne away, and they wanted to stop her. So if they didn't know she was a vampire, do they think she's just a murderer? Maybe they think she's just taking girls up there and killing them, which is basically true. There's just a little more vamping going on. One interesting thing we find out in this movie is, so the Van Helsing was actually called there by the priest. And the priest is having this conversation with the father of the murdered girl saying, we can't bury her on church grounds because she's not really dead. She's a vampire. So you kind of wonder why he doesn't just stake her to give her eternal peace, something like that. But through his conversations with Van Helsing, we learn he doesn't really know anything about vampires. He's just pretty sure there's something horrible going on, something supernatural. And Van Helsing has to come and teach him about this and how to stamp out this evil. When Van Helsing is explaining vampires to him, he says that vampires are a survivor of an ancient pagan religion, which is interesting. I don't think that's a take on vampires I've ever heard before. Does that make this movie folk horror technically? He also says that vampires have the power to turn into bats.
Some have the power to transform themselves into bats.
Which is pretty significant because we just talked about the first Dracula movie, Horror of Dracula, and about the fact that he says,
That's a common fallacy.
and here he just clearly says, yeah, some vampires have the power to do that. I think on one hand, you can take this as just kind of a retcon by the writers. Maybe they decided, you know what, we do want to have a bat in this movie. I think that would be cool. But on the other hand, I think if you just want to take all of this within the actual story, you can say that Van Helsing found out he was wrong. And they can. I mean, being a scholar is basically just being a constant student, constantly learning new things. We actually do see a vampire bat in this movie, but it's kind of unclear whether it is the Baron or it's one of his brides. But either way, the effect is actually pretty good. Okay, oh man, we have got to talk about one of my favorite moments in this movie. Actually, one of my favorite moments in all of vampire movies, maybe just all of horror movies. It is the rising of the dead of this young girl that was killed by the Baron. Out in the graveyard, Greta is actually there. It seems like Greta has gone fully insane, and in this movie just becomes like the house mother for all of the Dracula brides that Baron's gonna make throughout this movie. And she is encouraging, like Hammond in Jurassic Park, encouraging the birth of the Velociraptor.
Very good. Push.
push.
Ah, there she is. Ah, she comes. There's my little beauty. Ah, the clever one.
She is encouraging this vampire bride to rise out of the grave. She pushes the coffin up through the dirt, her hands coming out. She rises up. Oh my gosh. It's like some of the best macabre gothic imagery I've ever seen in my life. It is so awesome. Around this point, Van Helsing goes up to the Baroness's castle and discovers that the Baroness is now a vampire. Now that the Baron's been freed, he's turned his own mother. The Baron shows up, and again, he's in full Christopher Lee mode. He's hissing, he's snarling, no dialogue to be found here. And again, he's just not great at this. And this is my biggest frustration with this movie, is I just wish just keep him talking, like keep him more of a Frank Langella type vampire from Frank Langella's version of Dracula, where he's just always this suave, smooth killer. Just do that. But Van Helsing puts the mother to eternal rest, which she welcomes, but it confirms that now he knows his enemy. And around this point, we actually go back to the school where Marianne is now teaching. Van Helsing actually dropped her off there, and there's this really funny interaction with him and the headmaster, where the headmaster is really mad that Marianne is with a man. Oh, this is so horrible. But when he finds out it's Van Helsing, he's like, oh man, just fawning over Van Helsing.
Heavens, how could I be expected to recognize a doctor of philosophy, a doctor of theology, a professor of metaphysics?
I love it when like all of the accolades are lavished onto Peter Cushing's characters, whether it's Van Helsing or Dr. Frankenstein, when they just name off all the degrees they have. I don't know, it's just always fun to me. But back at the school, the Baron shows up to visit Marianne, and it seems like she's completely forgotten about all the creepiness that happened in the castle the last time she saw him, and she just immediately accepts him like, hey, this dude is handsome, let's chat. And he's back to his smooth, posh kind of a way. His charm is all back. And he asks her to marry him, and she says yes.
What?
I'm confused about this for two reasons. Number one, why on earth is she saying yes? Yes, like, he's a good looking guy. Okay, he's got nice hair, which I believe I heard was actually a wig, but whatever. But like, you just had this super creepy experience with this guy. You're not going to get to know him even a little bit more, even in this time period. I recognize this time period is very different when it comes to marriage. I get it. I've read Jane Austen, but still, it just seems crazy to me. But I'm also confused because why does he ask her? Like, he just bit and turned this other woman into a vampire. He's about to do it with somebody else. Like, does he actually love her? And does he actually want a wife? And after they get married, he's going to turn her into a vampire? It's not clear. And I think that's something that would have elevated this movie more, is if we got some kind of a little bit more into his head. Is he in love with her? Does she really matter to him? Or is he just a blood-sucking monster like Dracula? We just don't really get that confirmation. We kind of have to decide it for ourselves in our heads. And that just feels like a bit of a missed opportunity here. I just think if there's a problem to this movie, which there's not much because I love this movie, it's not that Dracula's not in it. That's not a problem. I actually really like that they made this movie the continued adventures of Van Helsing. Hey, let's go on another Van Helsing vampire hunting adventure. And I love that. I think that's super fun. That's not the problem. The problem is the Baron is just not done as good as he could be. He's good, but like, I just wish there was more. But okay, the Baron has decided he is not going to be faithful to his dear Marianne, because not long after this, we get his next biting sequence, which he comes into the room of one of Marianne's fellow teachers, who was just talking about how the Baron is so handsome, so charming, you're so lucky, I wish I was marrying that dude. But he comes in to bite her, she's immediately under his spell. This actress is named Andre Melly, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and she is good in this movie. Like, she has such a striking look, like very sharp features, very beautiful, but in a very unique way. And he goes in for the bite, which they cut. This movie kind of always cuts away from bite scenes. I think there might have actually been a censorship reason for that we're going to talk about just a little bit later. And not long after this, we get her resurrection, where Marianne sees the locks that are locking her coffin closed actually fall off. This is a part of vampire mythology I've actually never seen before, where they can just supernaturally make the locks fall for no reason. They don't break, they just drop. And Gina, that's the character played by Andre Melly, rises out of the coffin, and she looks awesome. Like, this actress, again, she has a very striking look. She looks incredible as a vampire. She is my favorite vampire in this movie for sure.
Please be kind to me. say that you forgive me?
She is the creepiest, and the shot of her as the vampire, the shot right here, is definitely the most iconic vampire shot from this film. But you're thinking, okay, there's a lot of vampire stuff going on. These vampires are being terrible. They're just turning people left and right. What's Van Helsing going to do about it? Well, right about this point, we get a Van Helsing versus the Baron fight scene. Peter Cushing got very physical in Horror of Dracula, especially when he runs over across the tables, jumps, and tears the curtains down. And he's getting really physical in this movie too. There's this really cool scene where he rope swings down and kicks the Baron. I can't quite tell if that's a stunt double or not. I think it might be a stunt double, but whatever. The character of Van Helsing is still being awesome here, but he's not successful. He actually does get bitten by the Baron. And this is where I want to kind of talk about the censorship issues with this movie. There actually were some censorship issues because David Peele's The Baron was not just biting pretty young women. He also bites a man. He also bites his mother. And the censors were, they were automatically thinking of vampire bites as a sexual act. I mean, Horror of Dracula kind of makes that pretty clear. But if he's also doing it to men and to family, they kind of had a problem with that. Now, it's all still in the movie, but I think that's might be a reason that this movie is cutting away from the bite scenes, and we don't see them quite as clearly as we do in the first film. But does this mean Van Helsing turns into a vampire? Come on. No. He invents a vampire curing system that I've never seen in a movie before. Honestly, I can think of a few characters, a few other movies that I wish had this system. It would have saved their lives. He heats up a piece of iron, burns his neck with it, and then pours holy water. And Cushing is awesome in this scene. Again, he's getting super physical. You really buy how painful this is, how he's writhing in pain, but he's pushing through it all the way because Van Helsing is awesome. And, he's cured. The movie, never questions it. It works. That rules. That's so great. I love that. Might be my favorite part of this movie. But okay, Horror of Dracula had an awesome sequence where they kill off the main vampire of the film. So does this movie, is it as good? Does it step it up a notch? I don't think it's quite as good, but it's pretty darn good. My favorite part of it is that Peter Cushing throws holy water in his face, and the burn makeup that appears on him is actually pretty good. It's pretty gnarly. He looks kind of scary here. And then Cushing, again, getting super physical. This is action hero Van Helsing before Hugh Jackman would ever do that. Peter Cushing pulls the windmill down to form a cross. The shadow of a cross hits the Baron, and he dies. And Marianne hugs Van Helsing. I really like how throughout this film, there's been this very fatherly relationship building between Van Helsing and Marianne, and I just think it's very sweet. I really like it a lot. So let's go ahead and rate The Brides of Dracula. Now for atmosphere, I'm going to give this an 11. No, I don't actually do that. I'm not going to play that game, but it does get a 10. I think this might be the best atmosphere in any Hammer movie. Astounding. Clearly this movie is a higher budget than the last one. The Baron's castle, jaw-dropping. The inn, so many colorful lights in there. That looks so good. Every location in this movie looks incredible. The graveyard scene, rising from the dead, my God, it is so great. Now for characters, I'm going to give this movie a 9. I think it's only a slight step down from Horror of Dracula, and that's really just because I like the main vampire less. The Baron doesn't hold a candle to Dracula, but like I said, I don't mind that this is just a new vampire story with a different vampire. Obviously, no vampire is as cool as Dracula, so it is what it is. I do wish the Baron was done better, but I like Marianne. She's very naive, not the smartest, but I think she's kind of a sweet character. The Baroness, Greta, these vampire brides, and also Miles Malleson as the local doctor. I haven't even talked about him. He shows up about an hour into the movie as just a bit of comedy relief, and it doesn't feel totally inconsistent. I don't mind it at all. I think he's actually funny. Now for story, I'm going to give this an 8. This is certainly not the just masterpiece storytelling of Horror of Dracula. It's got some slight holes here and there. I don't really understand the marriage aspect. I wish the story of the Baron was told a little bit better in terms of what he's really after in this movie. But I just love that this is another Van Helsing vampire hunting story, and the fact that it's as good as it is excellent. I honestly love this film. And if we're going to go to scares, I'm going to give this... Oh gosh, this is tough. You know what? I'm going to give this another 8. That's the same rating that I gave to Horror of Dracula. And it's true, David Peele's a step down for Christopher Lee. I've said that a million times. But I think the brides make up for it. The brides are amazing in this movie. I think they're really creepy. And the movie is titled The Brides of Dracula. So the fact that they're the creepiest thing in the movie kind of does work. All these rising from the dead sequences, the spooky woods, the fog. I just think if you're going to a movie for some spooky vibes for the Halloween season, I mean, my gosh, Brides of Dracula is going to give it to you all the way. Now, all in all, I'm going to give this movie a 9 out of 10. I think it's fantastic. This is one of my favorite Hammer movies. It always has been ever since I first saw it. It's the Halloween 3 of the Hammer Dracula series. It's the Friday the 13th Part 5 of the series, the one that doesn't have the lead monster character. It's funny how horror franchises do this sometimes, but I love Halloween 3. And I love Brides of Dracula too. But what do you think about the Brides of Dracula? This one seems to be a little bit of a divisive one, so I'm curious to hear your thoughts down in the comment section below. Please share. And if you want to see my review for Horror Dracula, you missed it, I've got it right up here, as well as a lot of my Hammer horror videos in this playlist right over here. And hey, give a like and a subscribe if you enjoy this. Got a lot more spooky videos coming along for this season. Thank you so much. I will see you next time.